Best and worst case scenarios for Mika Zibanejad. Can the long-tenured Ranger prove to be the number one center that the Rangers need? What is his floor and what is his ceiling going into next season? We discuss on today's episode.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1119 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporing the way we all want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So going to go ahead today and continue our fun-filled off-season series. We do this every year, and basically we just take a look at the best and worst case scenarios for every single New York Ranger player that we project to be on the opening night roster. We already talked about Chris Kreider. That was, I believe, 2 episodes ago, so you can check that one out if you missed it. And now we move to the second longest tenured Ranger and the player that will in all likelihood be the top line center going into this season. That would, of course, be Mika Zibanejad. And I know, technically the Panarin line is still listed as the second line. Are they really the first line? I'd like them to just make that official change and make things easy for us. But we'll go with how they go with it. And they do still list this as the top Ranger line. So Mika Zibanejad, we'll start with the worst case, one with the best case. Always good to be glass half full and end on the positives. As far as a worst case scenario for Mika Zibanejad, I think you could see a situation where he kind of becomes like a really, really streaky player. We saw quite a bit of that this past season. When he was hot, he was hot. He was as good as just about any center in the NHL, not named McKinnon or McDavid, but when he gets on a heater, he's as good as anybody. And when you factor in his all-around game, his defensive game, his importance to both units, he's right up there with the best centers in the game, the 2 names that I mentioned notwithstanding. But there was some streakiness that really crept into his game this past year. We saw him go 18 games without an even strength goal. This is your top line center. This is not a guy playing on the 4th line or even the 3rd line and somebody that's out there for 6 minutes a night. No, this is Mika Zibanejad, somebody that has been a fixture in the Rangers' top 6 basically ever since he got here, and somebody that has obviously had some awesome seasons. And let's not make it sound like Mika Zibanejad had a bad year last year. He was still close to the point per game territory and did a lot of good things for the Rangers, but there was a lot of streakiness to his game. I mean, that is undeniable. Those 18 games without an even strength goal, it stretched from the end of December to the beginning of February. And when you think about it that way, it's even more dramatic because, a whole month went by and some change on top of that. But by that same token, I think it's only fair to point out here when it comes to Mika Zibanejad, we saw some cold streaks. We saw some hot streaks too. There was a 19-game stretch early in last season where he had 12 goals and 15 assists. I mean, just stuffing the score sheet every night, 27 points in those 19 games. Also, the final 16 games of the regular season, 6 goals and 10 assists during that stretch. And honestly, the playoffs were basically a microcosm of good Mika and bad Mika, because the first 10 games of the playoff run, so the sweep of the Caps and the 6-game win over the Canes, we put those all together, 3 goals and 11 assists, 14 points in 10 games in the playoffs for Mika Zibanejad, coming up big for his team. But then, we saw the other side of the coin too, the 6 games against the Panthers. He had a grand total of 2 assists in that entire series. Just wasn't good enough. And again, kind of a microcosm of the streakiness that we saw develop. And I think in a worst case scenario, we see him become, a very streaky player. I mean, look, if somebody's streaky, there's some good in that too, right? Because when they're hot, and they're stuffing the score sheet, as I was mentioning. But we can't have, or we don't want to have, the top line center for the Rangers go into these dry spells where he's just not much of a factor, at least offensively, for long stretches of time. Everybody slumps. It's going to happen from time to time. But yeah, that was a little crazy last year where he went, 18 games without an even strength goal. I think also in a worst case scenario for Mika Zibanejad, We see him fall a little too in love with the one-timer. We've seen this, and this isn't all Mika Zibanejad. We see it happen from time to time with the Ranger power play and really all 5 members of that top unit. As good as that power play has been, and it has been a big-time strength for this team over the last handful of seasons, 3rd in the league last year, lethal when they're firing on all cylinders. But there are times where everybody on that unit just goes to feed one-timers for Mika Zibanejad, and he's ripping shots from the circle, and that's all well and good. I mean, look, you should do that from time to time, but we saw him, I think, score on fewer of those this past season than we have in the past, and yet the Rangers at times, and Mika's part of this as well, they just try to feed him on the power play, that one-timer, and he's just too good of a player, too dynamic of a player, too able to score in different ways, where he should just be settling for that, just staying stationary and ripping one-timers. Now, of course, again, I don't want him to completely take that out of his game, because when you can shoot the puck on one-timers the way Mika Zibanejad can shoot the puck, you have to take advantage of that to an extent. But there's times where that just kind of felt like their default setting. Let's just set up Mika Zibanejad for one-timers, and I'd like to see them get away from that a little bit. We talked about in the past that 5-goal game that Mika Zibanejad had a handful of seasons ago. What was it, like 4 years ago, whatever it was at this point? The thing that I loved about that, on top of the fact that he just scored 5 goals in a game, which is crazy, but all 5 of those goals were so unique. He's scoring on the power play, and he's scoring shorthanded, and he's scoring at even strength. He's scoring on a breakaway. He's scoring on a redirection. He's scoring on a backhand shot. All 5 of those goals were so unique, and Mika Zibanejad is just too good and too talented of a player to just settle for those one-timers over and over and over again. And, I don't want to see him fall too dependent on the one-timer, especially, like I said, last year, where it seemed to work less than it had in previous seasons. He scored on a couple one-timers, but not as many as we're used to seeing. I think also, in a worst-case scenario, for Mika Zibanejad, he is outmatched by other teams' number 1 centers. Not every team, but there's certain teams, and certainly when you get to the playoffs and you get 1 or 2 rounds into the playoffs, you're going up against elite players and elite centers and big-time players in this league. And, there's a whole debate on Mika Zibanejad being a number 1 center or not. We're going to get into that in a little bit later in today's episode, too. But there are times where the Rangers are going up against, a truly elite team. You get to the Eastern Conference Final, and at that point, when you get to the conference final, there's 4 teams left. These teams are no joke. These teams are all bona fide Stanley Cup contenders. But Mika Zibanejad going up against, last year, Alexander Barkov, for example, right? He lost that battle. I mean, I don't think that Barkov was like skating circles around him or ran him off the ice or embarrassed him or anything like that. But Barkov was simply better. And I think in a worst case scenario, we see that trend kind of continue. And we've seen it at times in the past when the Rangers are up against the truly, truly elite teams in this league. And they're one of them, by the way. They are one of the elite teams. People will debate me on that. They are an elite team in this league. But when they're up against some of those other elite teams, a lot of those teams are able to put a number 1 center on the ice that's just a little bit better than Mika Zibanejad. And you guys know how razor thin the margin is in the playoffs. Whether you win this series or you lose this series, you go to the next round and keep the dream alive, or you go home. And that comes down to, individual battles as well. And there's too many times where, again, I don't think he's like completely overmatched, but the other guy is just a little bit better than he is. And in a worst case scenario, I think we see that trend continue. I mentioned Barkov a second ago, and I mentioned what Mika did in the Eastern Conference Final, which was not much offensively, just 2 assists in 6 games. It's not like Barkov went off offensively either. He had 1 goal and 3 assists in those 6 games, so obviously a little bit more than Mika. But I should also point out, since there are Ranger fans that believe that power play points don't count, for Barkov, the 1 goal was at even strength. All 3 assists were on the power play. So it's not like, again, Barkov was lighting up the Rangers and just completely overwhelming Mika Zibanejad at even strength. But I do think, and we've seen this in the past, just a little bit better than Mika in that 6-game series. And again, the margin is very thin, and sometimes that's all it takes. So, yep, those are the worst case scenarios that I came up with for Mika Zibanejad. You can feel free to leave those in the comment section. Feel free to leave the best case scenarios in the comment section as well. Speaking of which, we're going to be getting to those, the best case scenarios for Mika Zibanejad in just a second. We're also going to talk about tonight's shoulder check showcase in Stamford, Connecticut. A lot of Rangers and former Rangers participating. It's a charity game. I've mentioned that before on the podcast, covered it last year. We're going to talk a little bit more about it and give you guys the full lineup of the players that are going to be there. Some other interesting names were announced. So like I said, we will do all that fun stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to fanduel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right. We just want to take a minute to thank all the everydayers, as always, for tuning into the Locked On New York Ranger podcast. Your team every day. You guys are definitely going to want to stick around. In our next episode, we're going to talk about everything that happens tonight in the Shoulder Check Showcase. Just a wonderful charity game put on in Stamford, Connecticut, Terry Connor's rink there, and a lot of former Rangers and other NHL stars participating. So we will do that in the next episode. But for today, let's go ahead and shift our focus right back to Mika Zibanejad, and we're going to talk about now the fun stuff, the good stuff, the best case scenarios for the Ranger number one center coming into this upcoming season. So I think in a best case, he continues to be one of the best special teams players on the planet. I don't think that's an exaggeration. When you look around this league and you look at the elite players, and there's guys that can do one or the other. There's guys that are just, assassins when it comes to the power play, and obviously very dangerous. And typically, the way it works, just about every team is going to do this. Your most skilled players, your most dangerous players, the guys that are most likely to put up points, those are going to be the guys that are on the power play. But a lot of those players that I just mentioned do not kill penalties. And the opposite is true as well. You'll have some grinders go out there that go out there, they block shots and they play physical and they have good positioning and their stick's always in the right spot. They do things that are really important to the success of a penalty kill. You don't really have that many players in the league that are, absolutely elite at both. And Mika Zibanejad absolutely is. I mentioned in the last section, the Ranger power play was number 3 in the league last year. I should add to that, the penalty kill was also number 3 in the league. And you could argue that no player on the Rangers had more to do with the success of both those units than Mika Zibanejad. You can maybe throw Kreider in there too, because obviously they're both on the top power play unit. And those two tend to play together on the PK as well. And they're go-to guys that the Rangers look to put on the ice whenever they're shorthanded. But Mika, man, he's always there. He's just a go-to guy for this team. Somebody that if there's a big spot in the game, if you're, trailing, or if you're on the power play and you need, somebody to score, you could look to Mika Zibanejad. If you're late in a game and you're shorthanded, you're going to have Mika Zibanejad on the ice in that spot too. And I think that the Rangers being as good as they've been on both special teams units, a lot of guys have a hand in that. And you got to even throw Igor Shesterkin in there as well, especially when you're shorthanded. There's defensemen that play well. And obviously when it comes to the top power play unit, that's a phenomenal quintet that the Rangers have there. And they all chip in. But Mika Zibanejad does it all. I mean, I think he's really kind of the straw that stirs the drink when it comes to both of those units and both of those units being in the top 3 last season. That is not easy to do. And like I said, there's guys around this league who excel at the power play. There's guys around this league who excel at the penalty kill. There aren't a whole lot that are outstanding at both. Mika Zibanejad is, and I know that he has his critics. I don't see how anybody can even argue against that. So that's number 1. Number 2 here, as far as best case scenarios for Mika Zibanejad, I think he reestablishes himself as a number 1 center this league. We've had this debate in the past. We're going to have it again right now. Is Mika Zibanejad a true bona fide number 1 center in the NHL? To me, I tend to take that term, number 1 center, I take it pretty literally. And I've talked about this before in the past as well. But I basically see it like this. There are 32 teams in the NHL. So to me, there are 32 number 1 centers. It doesn't mean that there has to be one from all 32 teams, but that is the very definition of a number 1 center. If you're good enough to be one of the best 32, because all 32 teams have one number 1 center. And, people might also look at it and say, well, Vincent Trocheck is the Rangers' number 1 center. They can have 2 number 1 centers. That's certainly possible as well, because there's teams out there that they don't have a center that would rank in the top 32 in the entire league. So again, it depends on your definition. Maybe for you, a number 1 center is like top 10 in the league or top 15 in the league. But again, I take it very literally and I look at it as the top 32. And if you look at it that way, then yes, he 100% is a number 1 center. There's no doubt about that. I do think, though, that there's times where, as I mentioned in the last section, he can be a little bit outmatched by certain centers, this guy or that guy. But, Mika Zibanejad is a really strong all-around player for this team. And I think, he'll be motivated coming into this season, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that they do now see Vincent Trocheck as the Rangers' number one center. But again, as I mentioned a second ago, there's no reason that they can't have two. And I think for sure both those players are in the top 32 centers. But if you see number one center a little bit differently and you see it as like only maybe, again, top 10 or top 15, can Mika Zibanejad get back into that if he's not into it now? I think absolutely he can. Going to be very curious to see how he does this upcoming season. But I think a big part of that, a big component of Mika Zibanejad getting back to being a number one center it has to do with something I'm going to talk about right here and right now, and that is the hopeful chemistry that develops between himself and Riley Smith. Because I do think coming into the season, there's a very good chance you're going to see Riley Smith as the guy with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. And we talked about Smith a couple episodes ago when we did our best and worst case scenarios on Kreider himself. But again, there's been so many right wingers on that line. I don't have to go through the names. I do that all the time. You guys know the names. You've seen all the players that have come and gone in that spot on the top line right wing for the New York Rangers. So my hope coming into the season is that there's finally some permanence there, and I would like it to be with Riley Smith. Kakko has had a bunch of chances. I mean, look, if they want to give him another chance and it actually clicks this year and Kakko has a strong training camp and a strong preseason and shows off some chemistry with them and they want to give Kakko a shot and put Smith on the third line, I'm open to that. But at this point, to me, it's time for somebody new to get a chance. And I have a feeling that probably will be Riley Smith coming into the season. So in a best case scenario, they make it work. Kreider and Mika make it work with Riley Smith. We've talked in the past about the Panarin bump, right? And you guys are familiar with that. The everydayers have heard me talk about this before. But basically, it's just a fancy way of saying that anybody that plays with Artemi Panarin, they see an uptick in their offensive production, whether it's, Lafreniere. We don't have to go through the names there, but we saw the effect that he had on Alexis Lafreniere this past season, just to name one, by far the best season of his career. So if Artemi Panarin can go out there and elevate guys like Ryan Strome and Andrew Kopp and Phil DiGiuseppe and Jesper Foss, then don't tell me that Kreider and Mika together, again, the number 2 and 3 highest paid forwards on the Ranger team, that they shouldn't be able to go out there and elevate one guy, whether that's Kakko, or I think it's probably going to be Smith coming into this year, or somebody else. To me, the two of them as leaders of this team and the two longest tenured players on the Rangers, they need to be able to go out there and figure it out with somebody and elevate somebody to top line right winger. Now, have they had a true bona fide top line right winger since Pavel Buchnevich was traded? Probably not. I mean, the one guy you could make an argument for would be Frank Vatrano, but obviously he was just a rental and, he's with the Ducks now. But that's part of the challenge, I think, of being a leader and being a top player in this league, is you have to be able to elevate other players around you. And the two of them together, Mika and Kreider, they should be able to elevate somebody, whether that's Kakko or Smith or somebody we're not even thinking of. If you want a real wild card, how about Brandon Hoffman? Maybe he gets a chance with them at some point this upcoming season, but they got to be able to elevate somebody in a best case scenario. They do that. And Mika finds chemistry with Riley Smith. I think in a best case scenario as well, Mika Zibanejad continues to be an elite defensive forward. Scoring can kind of come and go, and nobody in the NHL, I think, is impervious to a scoring slump, but that defense should always be there. And Mika Zibanejad has been a very good defensive forward for the Rangers for a long time. He has finished in the top 30 in the Selke for all of the last 3 seasons. So maybe elite's a little strong, but he a little bit of a strong word. But he should be, one of the better defensive forwards in the league. I think that's a good way to put it. And he has been the last handful of seasons. And again, the scoring can come and go, but the defense should always be there. Here's kind of a fun one for me. You guys know I'm big on faceoffs. Over 50% on the faceoff circle for Mika Zibanejad. His career success rate in the faceoff circle as a member of the Rangers is at 49.9%. He was at 49.3 this past season. I'd like to see him get over 50%. We talked about how good the Rangers were on the faceoff circle and how improved they were there. But it was really like Trocheck, basically, kind of like pulling the team success rate up a little bit because he was so. What was Trocheck, like 57 or 58%, whatever it was? So yeah, I'd like to see Mika just climb over the 50% mark by just a little bit. And I think in a best case scenario, to kind of wrap up this section, we see Mika Zibanejad just be a little bit more assertive. I mentioned the series against the Panthers and everything that happened there and defended Mika in some ways, but also, I did mention, and I'll say it again here, they need a little bit more than 2 assists in 6 games from their number 1 center. But I think also in a best case scenario, Mika just becomes a little bit more assertive because if you listen to some of his comments in the aftermath of that series, after the Rangers had lost the series, he said some of the things that I said on here almost, where, I made the point that because early in that series, Rangers were up 2-1, and a lot of Ranger fans were calling out the star players and lamenting the fact that, Mika's not doing anything and Panarin's not doing enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I made the point that at that time in the series, none of the Panthers star players were really doing anything either. So at the very least, the Rangers were, maybe their top guys aren't scoring a whole lot, but they're stopping the Panthers from scoring. And then Mika said something very similar during the breakup day interviews. And it's one thing for me to say that as a podcast host, but he's an alternate captain on the Rangers, their number one center, the second longest tenured player on the team. And he talked about like kind of a cancel out effect with the Panthers top line. Now, again, I'm not going to kill him for that because he's not wrong. They were able to shut down the Panthers top line early in that series and really throughout the vast majority of that series. It's not like those guys were absolutely going off for the Panthers, but I don't think that he can be satisfied or content with just canceling out the other line. Again, I understand what he's saying, but you'd just like to see a little bit more of a killer instinct, right? I mean, is that unfair? I think that's fair for me to say that. You can't let it up to just like, Jimmy Vesey and Matt Rempe scoring goals, If you're going to go up against the Panthers top line, you can't just be content with, canceling it out. And kind of both lines kind of taking each other out of the equation. And now you're Alex Wenberg, you're going to rely on him to score. Jack Ross, it's got to be, a little bit more of a killer instinct. You can't be satisfied with a tie, which is essentially seemed to be what he was saying there. I mean, I don't know, but again, I'm not going to kill him for it because he's not completely wrong about what he said, but you just want to see a little bit more, I think, of a killer instinct from Mika Zibanejad in that spot. And hopefully going into the playoffs this year, which I would think the Rangers would make it back again. Hopefully, he's not just looking for the cancel out. He's looking to go out there and dominate. That's got to be the mindset in the playoffs. You got to have that killer instinct. And hopefully the Rangers do have that come playoff time for this upcoming season. So we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second here. I want to shift our attention to the Shoulder Check Showcase. It is a charity event, charity hockey game that is going to be happening tonight in Stamford, Connecticut. Going to be talking about that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. Shoulder Check Showcase will be happening tonight in Stamford, Connecticut at the Terry Connors Rink. It is presented by the HT40 Foundation. This organization was set up in honor of the late Hayden Thorson. Hayden Thorson was a goalie from Darien, Connecticut. Unfortunately, passed away, committed suicide at the age of 16. And Shoulder Check Showcase is done in honor of Hayden. And it has a very simple but very powerful message to make sure that nobody feels alone and people are kind of checking in on each other and just making sure that they're okay and making sure that they watch each other's back. It really is a wonderful event. There have been charity hockey games that have happened over the years at that ice rink, but last year was the first Shoulder Check Showcase. And I said at the time, there's no way that they're not going to keep doing this, for years to come. And lo and behold, it is back this year. Really is a wonderful event. It's just so cool to see, so many players from the Rangers and players from the NHL and the PWHL as well, all coming together and participating in this event. It's not a very big rink. I think the capacity is less than 2,000, and I'm sure it's going to be packed this year, just like it was last year. But just very cool to see, the community come together and all these players, take part in this event. And so what I'd like to do now, you guys will bear with me for just a second. I'm going to on-screen share information from the event and also run through the roster really quick. And if you're listening on audio, don't worry, I've got you covered. I'll talk you through it. And I hope to see some of you guys at the game tonight. If you are there, definitely, come find me. I'll wear the Ranger hat that I'm wearing now, the one with all different kinds of crazy colors on it. So it shouldn't be too hard to find. You guys can find me there. Come say hi for sure. But yeah, let's go ahead. I'm going to, like I said, share the information. There we go. So yep, there's the info for those of you watching on YouTube. And again, those of you on audio, I will go ahead and just kind of talk you through it right now. So it is, of course, the second annual Shoulder Check Showcase. A lot of players from around the NHL. And you're also going to have Dave Maloney. He's going to be the MC. He did it last year as well. Did a great job. And I don't believe John Brancy was there last year. He, of course, sings the national anthem at a lot of the Ranger home games. But he is confirmed for this year. And I'm sure he's going to be singing the national anthem. I mean, if John Brancy is in the building, I think you got to take advantage of that and have him sing the national anthem because he does a phenomenal job. But as far as the event schedule, you've got parking beginning at 4 o'clock. Then you've got 5 o'clock. You got player arrivals, NHL, PWHL, and special guests arriving as well. And then the Shoulder Check Skills show begins at 6 p.m. 6:30, you've got on-ice player intros and, talking about the Shoulder Check Showcase itself. And then at 6:45, the puck drops, and we have ourselves a exhibition game. The 3-on-3, and just a very fun game, very kind of loose game. Obviously, people aren't going to be out there checking each other and diving across the ice to block shots, but you wouldn't really expect that. It is a charity game, and it is for a good cause, and it is for fun. And figure at that. With all that being said, we can go ahead and go through the roster here as well. I'll zoom in a little bit so you guys can actually see this. Let's see. So, yeah, like I said, I'll just kind of go through the names here. So we've got Cole Caulfield, Pavel Dorofeyev, Jesse Eldridge. We've got Joel Farabee, Shane Gossespear, Kevin Hayes, former Ranger Kevin Hayes. We've got Spencer Knight. I believe he's from Darien, so he's this whole thing is probably very near and dear to him. Chris Kreider, obviously from the Rangers. Charlie McAvoy, Mason McTavish, Sonny Milano. Milano was definitely there last year, as was Chris Kreider. A couple of these guys are doing it for the second year in a row. Shane Pinto going to be there. Jonathan Quick is going to be there. Quick was there last year, but he was in street clothes. He didn't actually play in the game. So I would think probably that's probably the way it'll go this year as well. He'll be in attendance, but maybe won't, wear the pads or anything. But who knows for sure? Maybe he will. We'll see how it goes. Matt Rempe. Matt Rempe's going to be in the building, and that's going to be very fun to watch as well. We've also got Abby Roque, Steven Santini, Kevin Shattenkirk, another former Ranger, Ryan Strome, another former Ranger, Ella Shelton is going to be there, Frank Vetrano, another former Ranger. He's going to be taking part as well. Micah Zandy Hart is going to be there. So is Trevor Zegras, one of the bigger names, non-Rangers that's going to be there at this event. He was there last year as well. And then we've got a bunch of celebrities that, I'll be completely honest, I have not really heard of any of them, but that's also because I'm going to be 38 next month, and probably the younger group will probably be more familiar with some of these names than I am. But you've got on the bench, you've got Kyle Van Gate, you've got Michaela Lay, you've got Swaggy Pete, and Coach Chippy. So they're all going to be there as well. So again, it really is a wonderful night. It is for an awesome cause. And, if you haven't had the chance to get your ticket, I would say do it now, because I can only assume this thing is going to sell out. I'm almost positive it sold out last year. And if it didn't, it must have been very close, because there was nowhere to sit in that place. By the end, it was standing room only. So yeah, definitely go ahead, get yourself a ticket. And hopefully I'll see you guys there tonight. If you are going to be there, send me a DM on Twitter. Email me, do whatever you got to do. Let me know you're going to be there. Come say hi. Definitely looking forward to talking to some Ranger fans and just enjoying a good night of hockey for, a really, really awesome cause. So I figure we could pretty much call it there for today. I have been talking about recently the fantasy league. If you guys want to get back into the fantasy league and you played last year, all you got to do is DM me or email me. A couple of you guys, I got to go through my email and respond. I've seen your emails. I just haven't had time to respond yet, but I will do that in the next couple of days. And if you didn't play last year, definitely get in touch sooner rather than later, and we'll save your place in line, and you can take the place of anybody that played last year and does not come back this year. But we'll give last year's players the first crack at it before we kind of open the floor. The other announcement, I did this in yesterday's episode, but just kind of as a reminder here, I am going to be taking a vacation next week. So there's not going to be any Locked On Ranger episodes for a week. But once that is over, I'm going to be back, and we're going to be doing this full time and having fun gearing up for the start of the New York Rangers season. So the episode coming tomorrow, the Shoulder Check Showcase, that will be the last Locked On Ranger episode for a week, but I'll be back after that. Good as new, ready to rock, and get everybody excited for the next season of Ranger hockey. Cannot wait for that. So, yep, we'll call it there. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. If you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys, and I will see you next time.